Yes, you that are watching this video, I want you to go on your phone and check your screen time right now. How is it? Is it embarrassing? Well, if that's the case, this video is for you. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hi, my name is Bri. I am a pre-qualified psychologist and this is a space where we use psychological principles to improve our well-being and support our self-development. In particular, in this video, we're going to talk about how to get rid of our addiction from digital technology and specifically from our phones. As usual, this video is going to be divided into chapters. In chapter 1, we will talk about the impact that phones and digital technology in general have on our brains. Although it might sound boring, this is a very important chapter because getting scared of the damage that we're doing to our brain and its consequences on our behavior is the first step of getting free of our addiction. In chapter 2, we will see all the techniques that phone companies use to get us addicted to our phones, which will help us outline in chapter 3 practical techniques to get rid of our phone addiction. So without further ado, let's get into it. Most of us will have had access to digital technology and smartphones at a very young age, which means that we are even more subject to the great impact these technologies have on our brains. First and foremost, we are going to talk about our attention span that, let's be honest, is completely messed up. The constant notifications that we receive on our phones interrupt us from our workflow or whatever we're doing, decreasing our attention span as we stop at different times of the day to check our phones. We basically constantly get distracted. Also, our phones got us used to multitask. Do you watch videos, reels, TikToks whilst eating, doing your makeup, or even brushing your teeth? When was the last time that you did any kind of activity mindfully without switching between tasks and without using your divided attention? All of us, we are constantly stimulated. We basically cannot cope with boredom. And I'll tell you something else. Some studies found a link between phone usage and the symptoms of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD. Nowadays, ADHD referrals and diagnosis are increasing, and although this may be due to an increased awareness that there is just around the neurodiversities and mental health difficulties, these studies actually makes you think whether people are developing more and more ADHD-like symptoms just because we are constantly stimulated by our phones. Bear in mind that ADHD is a neurodevelopmental diagnosis, which basically means you are born with it. You cannot develop it later in life. ADHD is also one of the most hereditary conditions out there, which basically means is genetics. It is actually very scary that people are developing ADHD symptoms just because of our phones. And apart from our attention span, I also want to talk about our memory. Our phones are basically designed to store information about us and about our lives, which means we don't actually have to remember anything anymore because our phones do it for us. And memory is like a muscle that needs to be used, otherwise your ability to remember things will just decrease. Also, our phones provide us with constant information overload that could also impact the efficacy of our memory. Something else that our phones could severely impact are our social skills. In fact, some studies found that people that were exposed early in life to digital technology struggled to recognize emotions from faces in real life. Also, spending more time on our phones also means that we're spending less time with people in real life. This can not only lead to social isolation, but also to a decreased ability to use social skills in real life. My next point is something that most people will be aware of, that is sleep. As we all know, digital technology, and in particular the blue light produced by our screens, will interfere with our circadian rhythm, leading to sleep disruption and making it harder for people to fall asleep and also impacting sleep quality. This can in turn lead to brain change and damage, which later in life could also cause conditions such as Alzheimer's disease. Smartphones also affect our brain by obviously leading to phone addiction. If you watch my videos on breaking bad habit, you would already be familiar with how addictions are developed, but in case you haven't watched it, this is a clip from that video that explained the process clearly. When we see a reward, an area of our brain called the ventral tegmental area, which controls control things like reward behavior, learning, and memory, is stimulated to produce dopamine. Dopamine will then travel to another area of our brain called the nucleus accumbens. The nucleus accumbens is known primarily for its role in pleasure, reward, and addiction. Once in the nucleus accumbens, the dopamine will bind to receptors in our neurons, and it will then change their activity. This change in neurons' activity will translate into us experiencing pleasure and reward. After all of this happens, the prefrontal cortex, that is the part of our brain associated with planning and decision making, assesses the event and connect the pleasure experienced with the action. Basically, the prefrontal cortex will say, oh my god, what just happened was amazing, we need to do it again. And the stronger the pleasure that we feel, the stronger will be the signal sent to the prefrontal cortex and other areas responsible for memory and behavior. And the stronger is the signal, the more likely we will be to perform that behavior again. Phone companies will know this process very well, and this is why a lot of people will be addicted to their phones and will show symptoms of addiction such as withdrawal, preoccupation, mood changes, reduction of productivity, and a general decrease of well-being. And finally, last but not least, the content that we consume on social media, as well as all the different consequences of phone usage, can also lead to conditions such as anxiety and depression. But how do we get here? What do phone companies do that make us so addicted to our phones? The first technique is something called intermittent reinforcement. This is a mechanism firstly discovered by the psychologist Skinner. He did an experiment on pigeons. In the study, there were two pigeons. The first pigeon was given food whenever a lever was pressed, whilst the other pigeon received food some of the times the lever was pressed, but not all the time. What he discovered was that the second pigeon became addicted to pressing that lever. And this was as a result of the intermittent reward that it was receiving. It is the same principle used by slot machines. You win some of the time, but not most of the time, and this keeps you stuck in front of the machine. Our phones do something very similar. So some of the time when we check our phones, we will see a positive interaction, which can be a comment, a like to our pictures, or just some interesting content that we see online. But other times, and I would say more often than not, we will not see such positive interactions. And this intermittent reinforcement keep us addicted to our phones and make us wanting to check our phones more and more. The second technique is obviously the one that concerns dopamine and habit formation, which we have discussed in the previous chapter, so I will not digress on it here. But as we know, each notification and positive interaction will make our brain release dopamine, which activates our reward system and make us develop bad habits related to our phones and even phone addiction. Then we have fear of missing out, or FOMO. Unfortunately, nowadays we rely more and more on our phones to keep us updated on what's going on in the world, but even to celebrities, to our friends, and yes, even to that girl in high school that you didn't like, but you're still checking your story to see what's your life like 10 years later. We want to keep ourselves informed, and we are afraid of missing out on important events, which in turn make us use our phones more. We now also have endless content. Do you remember when in our feed we only saw posts from people we knew? And do you remember that there was a time where our feed was finite, so at one point you reached the end of it and there was nothing new to see? Well, now this is not the case anymore, because social medias in particular will keep suggesting us content, making our feed literally infinite. We could be stuck scrolling our feed because it never ends. There is always more content to see. Notifications also play a big part in our phone addiction. Not only they disrupt our day and our general flow, giving us an instant dose of dopamine, but we also create an habit where whenever we hear a notification, we pick up our phones and we start scrolling, and sometimes without even checking the notification that we received because we don't really care about it, but for some reason we have now been scrolling for 5 hours and we don't know how. Another notification related technique is the red badge that you see on your apps whenever you have any unseen notifications. This creates a sense of urgency because because you just want to clear that red badge off your app. Something else that is used in particular by our social medias is our desire for social connectivity that keep us stuck into their apps. We know that we could be instantly connected to everybody, and we know that being online can also mean being part of a social circle. So how many of us had WhatsApp groups with our classmates in school? And if you weren't part of that group, you might have missed information about school or invitations to events. And in general, we want to be part of that social circle. We don't want to be left out. And this is what will prevent so many of us from deleting social media apps from our phones. Another techniques that we are now very familiar with is the fact that social medias and apps in general get information about us to suggest us content that we might find interesting. We have also sadly found out that our phones might be listening to our conversations, because sometimes I would say something and then I would see an ad about this thing on my phone later on the day, which is super creepy, by the way. But yeah, this means that we always see only content that interests us. So on social medias, we will basically never be bored. The big problem about this is that there is the risk that we might remain trapped in a bubble where we only see people that think like us and that have our same beliefs and that are maybe similar to us in some way. This could make us less open to hear point of views that are dissimilar from our own, because we are just not used to it now. We literally only interact with content that we agree with or that we find interesting or pleasurable. Finally, phones or apps are literally available at arm's length and are one tap away. They are so accessible that reaching for them has now become second nature for all of us. By the way, the majority of people that watch my videos are not actually subscribed to the channel. You can fix this by hitting the subscribe button below, and as I'm really just starting in my YouTube journey, this will really help my channel grow. So thank you very much if you do that. Hello! So, well, if something seems different around here, it's because it basically is. I realized whilst I was editing the video that the last part of the video was recorded without any audio, which was unfortunate, but we don't give up and we are here again. So, where were we? So once we have understood the effect that digital technology and our phones can have on our brain, as well as all the techniques used by phone companies to make us addicted by our phones, we are now ready to dive into some tips on how to get rid of our phone addiction for good. My first tip for you is to make your screen time visible. This is because knowledge is power, and being aware of a problem is the first step to solve it. I personally have my screen time as a widget on my home screen, so I can at all times see how long I am spending on my phone. And trust me, realizing that you're basically wasting your life on social media is a big motivator for you to just get off your phone. My second tip is to just get rid of notifications. You can deactivate them on the settings of your phone. In this way, you won't be distracted throughout your day by unwanted notification, and this will also reduce the likelihood that you will take your phone and start scrolling when you don't mean to. You can also set allocated times in your day when you are allowed to check in each individual app whether you have received any notification. This will prevent you from compulsively checking every app just to see whether someone has liked your picture or commented on your latest post. The next tip is massive unfollowing, and I want you to be very strict with this. I want you to go on your following list and just remove anyone that you A, not interested in knowing what they're doing, B, that make you feel bad about yourself, or that C, does not add anything meaningful or positive to your life or even to your feed. If you think about just how much time we waste just watching the stories of people that we don't care about, it's absolutely crazy. I personally went from following like 700 people to only following 300, and since I've done this, I've been spending much less time on social media because I just have fewer contents to see overall. overall. On the other hand, I want you to start following only accounts that provide inspiring and motivational content. In this way, you will have your phone working for you and not against you. My next tip for you is to set limits on your apps. Once you have realized which ones are the apps that you spend the longest time scrolling, you can go on your phone settings and set some limits on those apps so that you will be notified when you reach the limit. I'm not going to say that this is a perfect deterrent, because again, for most settings you will just be able to ignore the time limit and just continue scrolling, but at least you will be doing that consciously and mindfully. And I think this is a whole takeaway here. I'm not saying that we shouldn't use social medias at all, but that we should be doing it wanting to do it. I think that we have a big problem whenever we start scrolling when we don't even mean to. We just do it mindlessly because it's a habit and we don't do it with a purpose. Ignoring a time limit on an application makes it more intentional, so you know that you're intentionally making the decision to continue whatever you're doing on that app. To make sure that we are using our apps intentionally, something else that we can do is to just remove our apps from our home screen. So in this way, if you want to get on a certain app, you will need to actually type its name on your phone just to be able to find it. This will make the app less accessible, and again, whenever you want to use that app, you will need to make a conscious and intentional decision to use it. You could also put your phone in another room away from you for the entire day, so whenever you need something on your phone, or even whenever you just want to mindlessly scrolling for 5 minutes, you can still do that, but again, you will be making a conscious decision to do that. And finally, my last tip for you is to just set a day in your week or even a few hours in your week when you're doing a digital detox. So when you are not allowed to have anything digital. This will make you realize that the world won't end if you're not connected, and that anyone that really needs to reach you can find an alternative way to get in contact with you. Although, let's be honest, most of us won't really need to be constantly reachable 24 hours to the point that you can't even get a day off your digital screen. So I'm sure you will be fine. In conclusion, our phone and in general our digital usage can have great effects on our brains. Companies use a lot of tricks to make us addicted to our phones, but we can also use our own tricks to make sure that we break that addiction. And this brings us to the end of the video. I really hope you enjoyed it and found it helpful. If you did, you can leave a thumbs up or leave a comment, as it really helps the algorithm apparently. As usual, I'm going to leave some references and further readings in the description box below, where you will also find my socials and my website. I am also going to leave my video on breaking bad habits somewhere here in case you want to check that out, as it is very relevant also for the topics that we discussed in this video. And that is really all for today's video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!